Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. For the second half of our program, we're pleased to have futurist and senior fellow at the Fraser Institute, Sonia Arrison, author of 100 Plus, How the Coming Age of Longevity Will Change Everything, from careers and relationships to family and faith. Sonia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Sonia, earlier on the show, we had Peter Thiel on, and he, of course, wrote the foreword to your book, 100 Plus. He makes an observation that we are reaching a deeper understanding of life that will enable us to reverse all human ailments in the same way that we can fix the bugs of a computer program. I sure hope we do better than a computer program. How many programs do you know that can run for 100 years without crashing?
Yeah, right. That's a good point. He's right. We're at this point in history now where we actually have the tools to start repairing people rather than just keeping them alive a little bit longer with whatever ailments they have. Just like a computer is built on ones and zeros, the human body has a code too. It's the ACT and G of DNA. And, we can read it already. We can read it for much cheaper, right? That's the human genome. And now that we can read it, the next step is to start writing it. And there's a lot of very smart people working on that right now.
Well, let's stop a minute with the analogy. How many machines do we build that have the durability or the ability of self-repair of the human body? I mean, how long do you keep your car before you have to replace it?
That's a very good point. I mean, the human body isn't an immaculate machine. I mean, it's really quite amazing that we can go for so long and self-repair. And that's the magic of stem cells and regeneration.
So, Sonia, there's so much to talk about. I kind of like to divide it into two pieces. And let's just start with the science. Let's not go into the implications just yet. Maybe you can run us down through the various areas where we're seeing great breakthroughs and start with the most obvious ones, hips and knees and maybe body organs and replacement parts.
Right. So it's sort of the lowest hanging fruit in the regenerative medicine space is tissue engineering. And that's the ability to grow, brand new human organs, parts, out of your own stem cells. So far, bladders have already been done, windpipes, blood vessels. Scientists are now working on heart parts for humans. That's already been done in rats. And of course, cartilage has been grown for people's knees and things like that. In my book, I tell the story of Jarvis Green, a football player who got fired from the team that he was on because he told me when I interviewed him that he literally couldn't walk from his car to his house, that his knees hurt that badly. And then he went to a stem cell clinic in Colorado, got some of his own cells taken out. They made more of them, put them back in, and it regrew his cartilage. Then suddenly he could run again, and he got re-signed to another team. It's funny because when I was talking to him, he said, I believe in guardian angels. And I was thinking, well, it's science actually, but
right.
It doesn't matter what the explanation is. What matters is the outcome, and this guy got his knees back, and that's really quite amazing.
But it does sound like low-hanging fruit. Where are we on growing a new liver or even growing an artificial liver to be implanted? That's a pretty complex chemical organ.
Scientists are getting closer. There was a team in Asia that grew some liver buds, like they grew the beginnings of a liver, and that's important. You might look at that and say, oh, well, that's not an entire liver, so who cares? It's important for a number of reasons. It shows proof of concept that they can start to do it in the lab. And it also means that they'll be able to test drugs on those liver cells rather than, when scientists test drugs on lab animals, it doesn't always translate because they are not human beings. And when scientists get the ability to start testing drugs on real human cells in a meaningful way, that will change a lot.
People have been trying to build a mechanical artificial heart for quite some time. No one's gotten there yet because of, I guess, the damage it does to the blood cells that pass through. Where are we on growing artificial hearts?
Very close. Dr. Doris Taylor, who's at the Texas Heart Institute, about a year ago said that she was 2 years away from starting trials, maybe not on a full human heart, but on heart parts. Which meant that she was growing, heart valves and heart pieces that could be transplanted into humans using built out of their own stem cells. So scientists are getting closer and closer to being able to significantly repair human hearts, which is a big deal because heart disease is the number one killer in the country.
Anything going on with lungs?
Yes. Yeah, every single organ is being worked on right now. Lungs have been grown for animals in the lab. They're a much harder organ to create because of all the little tubes and bubbles and things like that. But yes, of course, scientists are working on that. I spent a lot of time talking with Dr. Anthony Atala at the Wake Forest Institute for Regenerative Medicine, and that's one of the things that they're looking at, along with a whole host of other things that they're working on growing.
So patching up body parts is probably the lowest level. What's the next level up in terms of engineering longevity?
The next level up would be gene therapy. And there's a lot going on in that area too. Right now, gene therapy has been used already to cure some leukemias in human patients by taking out their T cells, their immune cells, changing them in the lab, growing more of them, and then putting them back in the body. So the problem with cancer is that your body doesn't realize that it's a problem, and so it lets it grow. And so what scientists did is took out some of the patient's immune cells, made those immune cells recognize the cancer as disease, put them back in, and those immune cells ate up the cancer. And it worked. And so that's really exciting. And that same technique can be used for other things like HIV and other diseases. So it's super exciting.
So that's basically taking care of things that have gone awry. What about stuff that just wears out and needs to be replaced?
Well, I think that's where stem cells come in as well. The stem cells are the cells that regenerate things inside your body. I know that scientists are also working on injecting stem cells into places that have worn down, where they could go in and try to repair and build it back up again.
How broad is this field of anti-aging research, and where's all the money coming from?
That's a good question. And it's only been in the last couple of years that anyone in the science community will actually use the term anti-aging. I don't think they even still like to use that, although the meme is starting to change a little bit. And the reason for that is I think, for the longest time, anti-aging is just that idea, and that meme has just been full of all these snake oil salesmen.
Yeah, Ponce de Leon kind of worked on it for a while too, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was just something that a real scientist didn't like to talk about. And the other thing is the concept of aging has changed in the last little while. Also, as scientists have shown, that aging is now plastic. I mean, everyone used to think that aging was set in stone. You can't reverse it. You can't do anything about it. I mean, it is what it is, and you can't change it. Just like we used to think that the brain wasn't plastic. And then we learned that the brain was plastic, it could change. And now we've learned that aging can actually be slowed down. And the reason we know that is that scientists have actually shown in lab animals that they've been able to slow down aging through a number of genetic tweaks or through calorie restriction or in different methods. So we know that aging is plastic now, and now that meme is widespread, I think that the people who are working on all these different ways to repair human beings feel more comfortable using the term, aging research. I don't think any of them actually like to say anti-aging. I think they
prefer
like to
aging
talk about
research.
Aging research.
Well, there have been some stumbles along the way. I know people got very excited about the GlaxoSmithKline purchase of, what was it, Futurist and the Resveratrol technology, which turned out to be a big bust and a $700 million hole in the ground. Right,
yes. And, David Sinclair, who led that company and who was working on Vesirotins and Resveratrol, is still doing work on those pathways. He hasn't given up on it, and it's still an important pathway. So I'm not sure, even though that one particular thing didn't work out, doesn't mean that it's completely irrelevant.
And tell us about work in the telomerase area.
Right. So your telomeres are little, you can think of them as shoelaces, and as they start to get shorter, as you age, they get shorter and shorter, and eventually they just die, and that means the cell is going to die. And so as scientists, it's unclear what role telomeres play in aging. I was actually just at an aging conference a couple days ago, and there was a big discussion about this, and someone was saying, well, maybe we could just use them as biomarkers, because you can say, well, look, this can show us how quickly someone's aging. If a telomere is shorter than the average for that age range, that means that person is aging quicker than, the other people in that age range. And even then, some of the scientists who were working on it weren't sure that was really an appropriate biomarker. So
still a lot of unknowns.
There's a lot of work to be done in that area, yeah.
So, Sonia, your book and a lot of your work really deals with two things. One is the science of aging research, but the other is the implications, the political implications, the philosophical implications, the economic implications. If we really do extend life expectancy to 150, 200 years, what do we have to worry about?
Well, I think probably one of the biggest worries is a longevity divide. I mean, there already is a divide within the world and even within the United States. For instance, a Native American male in South Dakota had a life expectancy of 58 years versus the highest life expectancy in the U.S. is an Asian American female in New Jersey with a life expectancy of 91 years.
We're already living with this, so why is this going to be a problem in the future? And think about the third world, compared to the United States.
Right. Well, because it's going to become greater. It won't just be a 33-year gap at some point. It could potentially be a 100-year gap. And when the gap is that big, it'll be much, much more noticeable. And, that might be something people are willing to literally fight for their lives for, right?
Well, the best way to increase longevity is to make people wealthier. Isn't that the better place to start?
It is. And the news is good on that, actually, because it turns out that as human beings live longer, not just longer, but healthier lives, that allows them to be more productive, and that generates wealth. So, the good side of a long-lived, healthy population is that the economy grows, and we have tons and tons of data supporting that.
Actually, isn't it the other way around? As people get more productive and can afford a better lifestyle and better health care, they live longer?
Well, it goes both ways. It's academics used to think that it only went one way. They thought that wealthy people always live longer, but they didn't take a look at the other way around, that living longer makes you wealthier, until fairly recently. But they're both true.
Sonia, there's a big difference between living 150 years and living forever. Don't we conflate that in some of these conversations?
Yes, I think so. I think when there's discussions about longevity, people tend to sometimes think about just living forever. And honestly, that's never going to happen. There's always going to be accidents. There's always going to be something. People will never live forever.
So we're already having trouble paying for the Social Security and Medicare payments of people who live to be 85 years old. How is this going to work, and how is democracy going to handle 150-year-olds?
Well, one of the surprises, I think one of the things that's going to surprise a lot of people is that as we can live longer and healthier lives, healthcare costs are actually going to plummet. They're going to go down. And the reason for that is that we're going to be repairing people rather than just extending the time that they're sick. So right now, if you have heart disease, you get some medications, and pharmaceuticals can help you, and diet changes and all these things can help you live a little bit longer and healthier, but they're not going to actually repair the disease. They're just going to keep you going for a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll still have the trips to the doctors, and you'll still have the emergencies, and you'll still have all of those things that are very, very costly.
And you'll still start to wear out and slow down.
Exactly. But in the future, when we can repair people, that's not going to be the case. And if you have heart disease, it'll just be fixed. Then you'll be done. You don't need to go in for your next annual extreme heart checkup because your heart will already be better. And you can get on with your life and, all the things you're interested in doing and creating value and, pushing society forward.
And mostly getting back to work. If we're going to live for 150 years, we're going to have to work for 120 of them.
Yes, of course. But, I think the nature of work will change along with all of that as well.
And how do you think our political systems will respond to that?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Political systems is something I didn't really cover in the book. It's hard to predict what will happen, but as people live longer and have more experience, I think that's going to shape how they react to politicians and their promises.
Well, we know what happened last time. When they passed the Medicare bill, people usually died before they started collecting. Those rules haven't changed, and now we're teetering towards bankruptcy, and we haven't had a chance to fix that. Why is the future likely to be any different?
Oh, right. Well, the incentives are certainly going to change, aren't they? As people can live longer and healthier lives, well, they certainly won't die before the consequences of a bill are apparent to them. And, it's going to be a different ballgame.
And we're going to have congressmen with maybe 70 years of tenure?
Yes, absolutely.
That's a pretty frightening thought.
Although maybe that will spur people to reform the system in the future and say, look, there's got to be some kind of term limits and new rules given the fact that people are living much, much longer periods of time because we don't want these lifers here in Congress that are making rules on our behalf, and we're not really happy with it.
Which raises another philosophical issue, which is even if the machinery is all working and the brain somehow manages to repair and rejuvenate itself, the mind continues to age. We continue to accumulate experiences, both good and bad. We get both wisdom and we also get sarcastic and sour as we get older. What do the behaviors of existing long-lived people tell us about that?
Well, when I was doing research for the book, I was trying to find evidence that as people got older, they became more jaded and crotchety and all of the things, all the stereotypes that we have that, as people get older, they just kind of get grumpy and all of that. And I dove into the psychological research and talked to a number of scholars in the area. And what I found, which surprised me, was actually that type of characteristic, you either are or you aren't. And maybe it becomes exacerbated as you get older.
You become more like yourself.
But you know what? The crotchety people who are old were also crotchety when they were young. You just didn't notice. So, I'm actually I don't think that we're going to, as people live much longer lives, that we're going to see this increase in sort of grumpy old people around. I think that actually the experience and wisdom will just maybe exacerbate whatever personality they had in the first place.
So religion has dealt with death and aging from time immemorial. How is it likely to evolve as the frontiers of death get pushed further out?
So that was a super interesting question for me. When I was writing this book, I thought that I was going to find that as humans got further and further away from death, religion would become less and less important. So I figured, the afterlife, the further we get away from that, maybe God won't matter as much. And it turns out that's not the case, which really surprised me. And I spent a lot of time digging into the research and talking to the scholars in this area. And one of them explained to me, he said, Sonia, probably the reason why you're not finding what you thought you were going to find is because religion is not just about the afterlife. It's actually a big part of religion is about the purpose of life and how to live the best life. And so you could actually make the argument that as you live for a longer period of time, you need more guidance. And that actually may make religion more important in the future. And so the conclusion I came to in my book was that the religions that focus on how to live the good life and what's the purpose of life, those are the ones that are going to do well in the future. And the religions that focus on the afterlife, those will be the ones that probably start to wither away.
Well, it's going to have to help us because if we live 150 years, we'll have at least 4 midlife crises. That's
right. Yes. No, I actually think that psychological issues are going to be a big growth area as we can live longer.
And I suppose
lives.
Marriage counseling too.
Exactly, because there you have much more time to get married and divorced and do it all over again and again and again and again.
So ever since Malthus, the gloom and doomers have predicted that we're going to overpopulate the earth, despoil the environment, and run out of resources. If we live longer, does this become more of a problem?
A lot of people think that that's the case. And I found actually some scholars who did some work on population growth and longevity. And they did an experiment where they said, okay, well, what if the entire population of Sweden were to become immortal tomorrow, never ever die, right? Not 150 years, not 200 years, immortal. What happens to population growth in that country over the next 100 years? And so they took the regular UN model
right.
and the World Bank and popped in all the numbers. And it turns out that Sweden's population would only increase by 22% over the next 100 years. Now, that's something, right? I mean, that's not
easy.
Nothing. But it's not nearly as big as you would have thought it would be. So I asked them why, and they said, look, it's because heavy population growth is triggered by births, not by fewer deaths. And it's because when you have births, they're exponential. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many. I think the Duggars on that reality TV show have 19 kids or something, right? But when one person doesn't die, it's only one person, and so that doesn't grow population in the same way as birth. So population growth really depends on fertility rates. That's why longevity technologies are probably not going to be the cause of any heavy population growth in the long term. So that's good news.
So Sonia, perhaps I can call you an evangelist for living 200 years. Is this going to happen by itself, or do we have to do something to get there?
It's absolutely not going to happen by itself. And complacency is the thing I think we need to fight the hardest, because all of this technology, we're just here at the beginning. We finally have the tools to start repairing human beings. We're finally at this place in history, but it's not going to just happen on its own. And everybody has to make an effort to make this happen. Scientists, people who fund the research, governments, regulators, journalists. I mean, everybody in society has a role to play in moving the revolution forward. And it really is going to mean the difference between whether or not it's going to happen for people like me who are in their 40s, or maybe, am I going to be in that next generation who gets to live to 150 years in a healthy state? Or am I going to be part of the last generation who only got to live to 80 years? And, I feel like I'm on the cusp, and I don't want to be in that last generation. I want to be in the first generation that gets to live to 150, but it's not going to happen unless we all work really, really hard at it.
So you're arguing to make this a priority amongst all the other competing priorities.
Well, this is the priority. Without life, you have nothing.
Sonia, thanks so much for exposing us to these views. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
That was futurist and best-selling author Sonia Arrison, author of 100 Plus, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. If you have any suggestions for topics or guests, please visit realclearradio.org, click on the email Bill link, and drop me a line. Real Clear Radio Hour is produced in conjunction with Real Clear Politics, America's premier independent political website. That wraps up our show for this week. Join us next week, same time, same station, on our growing network. See you then.